Good morning, everybody. So, in 2011, Eli Pariser wrote The Filter Bubble. In it, he observed that personalization is shaped by inherent biases. The more we interact with algorithms that pander to our preferences, the deeper we cocoon ourselves in an echo chamber. We tend to consume things we like because, well, we're always recommended things that we are most likely to have an affinity for. So he argues that the filter bubble keeps us bound within our comfort zone. But biases are part of human nature, and it defines us as individuals. We want to eat, wear, and be surrounded by all the things that shout, "This is me, this is my brand." And it's been 10 years since the book, and personalization is stronger in demand than ever before. And for brands, the stakes are high for them to, well, sell more products and services to us if they are able to figure out what we like. So I want to spend a bit of time talking about everyone's very first personalized experience. Birthdays. Are there any people celebrating their birthday this month? No? Okay. So when I was a kid, I would remember being really, really excited when my parents would take me to the bakery to order my birthday cake. I would flip through the photo catalog, and I'll pick out the design and the flavor of the cake. Nowadays, you can get sculptural masterpieces made to order, and I would be really jealous to have that now. But have you ever thought about how much data you actually exchange when you purchase a birthday cake? For a start, apart from the design and the flavor of the cake, the baker would need to know the birthday person's name, the message that goes on the cake, perhaps their age, to know how many candles to go on the cake, even their birth date, so that they can prepare the cake on time and give it to you in time. Then you have to pay for the cake. And nowadays, we pay everything by card. And thus, the baker now has the history of your cake order. We're going to have a cake delivered. So the baker and the delivery company will have to know your delivery address, as well as your contact details in case something happens to your order. And then the day of celebration arrives. You post all your photos on social media, and you tag your location, you tag your family, you tag your friends. That is a lot of data you exchange because of one special cake. But research has shown that 8 in 10 people are willing to share their data in return for a personalized experience. And the power has shifted to us, the consumers. When surveyed, 71% of consumers expect personalization from brands. They want brands to know what products and services matter to them and when they need it. Because let's face it, we love and repeatedly purchase from brands that understand us. We want to feel special, and to command customer loyalty is to provide a differentiated customer experience. Consumers, young and old, everyone, we're all very knowledgeable and savvy these days, thanks to the digital devices and internet research at our fingertips. A moment of dissatisfaction can lead us to seek alternatives. And we have a plethora of choices in today's highly competitive market. Everyone is freely and easily able to switch to a new product or service at any given point in time. Personalization also has a ripple effect. And there are 78% more likely to make a repeat purchase and refer family and friends because they had a really good experience. So the concept, sorry. So personalization is very data-driven. And what do companies use our data for? Because in order to create customer experiences that speak to our needs, companies need to know what our needs are. So firstly, data is used to improve a product or service in order to retain customer loyalty. Secondly, brands and companies might use targeted marketing in order to reach out to consumers to drive desire to purchase or attract new consumers to grow their business. And thirdly, we don't talk about this a lot, but sometimes we acquire new consumers through questionable means, and there are companies that exist out there that acquire data from one company and then auction or sell it off to others. The concept behind personalization is using data to influence consumer behavior. Social media, when we use it, we are scrolling, it captures our attention, and the algorithm knows what grabs our attention to keep us scrolling. Targeted marketing, it compels us to buy the latest trends in fashion and technology. And for recommendation engines, they understand our preferences and they tell us that people like us make these purchases that they enjoy, so you should enjoy them too. Personalized persuasion is a $491 billion industry, as researched in 2021. And now companies will traditionally use what's called targeted marketing, where they use consumers' behavioral and demographic data to customize marketing messages to us. So for instance, if I'm online, I'm searching, my demographic is women between the ages of 21 to 55. I search yoga in the afternoon. And then just immediately and magically, I'll get ads for yoga mats, yoga pants, and they'll start following me all around the internet. Does that sound familiar? When brands leverage on psychological targeting, that's one step up. They are able to understand and target specific consumers based on their psychological traits that reflect their preferences. So Dr. Sandra Matz, she's a professor at Columbia Business School, and she specializes in psychological targeting. So when she was doing her PhD thesis, she was studying Facebook users. And what she found out was that she was able to analyze and predict their psychological traits for people, and she only used information and profiles from people whom she had permission to access. So her team ran an experiment where they crafted customized ads for an online beauty retailer to target like these consumer sets. So when they matched the content of the persuasive messaging in the ads to the psychological characteristics of all these individuals that were targeted, they found out that there was a 40% increase in click-throughs and 50% higher chances of purchase rather than if they sent out mismatching or unpersonalized messaging. And just this year, Google and Microsoft, they've been starting to insert ads into AI experiments. This effectively can change the way brands target us through the ads in the search results. Lazy Chat is Lazada's new chatbot, and it's powered by ChatGPT. So it got me wondering, if we start to use AI to help alleviate decision fatigue and to help predict our preferences, will it start to actually manipulate our preferences because all it suggests are nudging us towards very specific and certain decisions. Personalization tactics, technology enablers, they are going to be evolving exponentially. And if you're developing a product or service, it's wise to personalize because you want to stand out against the crowd. And brands, they're always finding new ways to mine data in order to acquire and retain their consumers. But in order to personalize responsibly, we need to respect the consumer's right to privacy when handling their data, and at the same time, providing true value in exchange for it. Why does privacy matter? In the 2000s, we saw the rise of big data, but it also opened Pandora's box. Storage became much cheaper, so now companies, they want to capture and store every bit of information possible about their consumers. And that includes multimedia data, which comprises of very large files, as well as social media data, which is expensive in volume. Because they thought that by having more data, they can just learn a lot more about consumers, so they collect everything. And soon, we try to datafy everything that we can. Your location gets translated into GPS coordinates. Sorry. Your likes and preferences, they get translated into likes and favorites on social media. And this, in turn, powers AI. It will feed the algorithms that infer probabilities in order to create hyper-personalization. But in recent years, we're seeing the detrimental effects of big data. There is so much of our personal data that's out there in the 10-odd years or so that we've been interacting with social media and whatnot. We do not know how much is out there or who even has access to the data. We know scams are on the rise every day, we see in the news. We do know that there are companies that are selling data, and hacked or leaked data is sold on the dark web. As consumers, we always want to feel safe when interacting with brands, and we want to be reassured that our personal data is secure. And when surveyed, 73% of consumers, they are willing to share their personal data if brands were actually transparent about how it's being used. On the other hand, if you have data breaches, they will erode your trust in the consumers. And it actually can cost you financially. In 2022, the average cost of a data breach was about $4.35 million. Data privacy delivers digital trust. In consumers, it makes them more confident that their online interactions are private and that their personal data is their own. Businesses, it's a win for them when they inspire trust in their consumers by protecting their privacy preferences. And lastly, with government policies, we can hold businesses accountable, protect consumers' rights, as well as facilitate universal access to data for policymaking. We all know that the outcomes of privacy-oriented practices instill more trust in your brand. Consumers will prefer your brand over others. They will support your brand more. They will want to tell others about your brand, and of course, pay more to shop with your brand. We don't need privacy and personalization to be at odds with each other. In fact, we should actually have personalization leverage on privacy in order to build trust and loyalty in consumers. In my responsible personalization framework, I've built it upon privacy-first design, and I've added customer experience best practices. And there are 5 lenses, as you can see here. So lens one, we want to research how much personalization is relevant to your consumers. There is a framework in the privacy space called the privacy utility trade-off. So privacy here refers to how much a user is protected from being identified. And utility refers to how much the data is useful and rich. On one end, we have high privacy, low utility. So for example, in telemedicine, they want stronger governance because they want to protect against security breaches. On the other hand, you have low privacy and high utility. So here, social media, they'll always want high utility from the data because marketing is their core revenue driver. When we build personalized experiences, we want to consider where is your acceptable trade-off. And the acceptable trade-off has to consider three things: the risk and legal appetite of the brand, the users in the data, and third, the goal and purpose for providing personalization. So how do we find out that your personalization is relevant to your consumer? We'll take a user-centered design approach. So you want to do user research, competitor research, market research, basically research everything. We want to empathize with the consumer that is going to face the problem that you want to solve using personalization. Maybe you want to see what all your competitors are doing to solve the similar problem and how you're going to differentiate your product or service in the market. You want to survey the sentiments of your target audience about data collection and data usage. Define the problem from their perspective. You want to understand their pains and their needs. Is it a problem that we want to solve? Is it a problem that's worthwhile solving? Ideate, prototype, and test. You want to validate your assumptions and validate the user experience you're going to be crafting for them. And you want to conduct the risk assessment on the data that you're going to collect. So Spotify has gotten very good at understanding our preferences and what we want to listen for each and every one of us, and we're all different. But what if suddenly one day I decided I wanted to listen to something completely different? They have also rolled out Discover Weekly that kind of caters to this yearning for wanting diversification in my playlist. But at the same time, they also have to balance it where the algorithm needs to be able to figure out what might I still like with this new music. It can't move too far from what I dislike. Lens 2 is to collect as little data as possible. So now you've done your research and you understand how much personalization I want to provide. The challenge now is to provide that using the smallest data set that's necessary. The Germans have a word for this, Datensparsamkeit, and it's enshrined in the German Federal Data Protection Act. And what it means is to store only as much personal information as is absolutely required. Because all of us know storing excess data is very risky. The more data that you have, it equates to more data that can be leaked or stolen in a security breach. And the more enticing the data and sensitive the data is, the more enticing it is to hackers. Companies will then face increased liability for damages. So for example, in 2018, SingHealth, they were breached. And as a result, personal data and medical information of 1.5 million patients was stolen. And consequently, SingHealth was fined a collective $1 million by the PDPC. Furthermore, this actually impacted the consumer if hackers got hold of this data and sold it on the black market. This will create public distrust in your brand and your reputation. We know from research that at least 74% of consumers, they highly value their data privacy. So we need to keep asking ourselves, how much data do we need to collect from them in order to provide the personalization that we want to provide to them? Do we need to collect personal identifiable information from them? Are there aspects of their individual profile that are purposeful to what we want to build for them? Or can we just get away with using aggregated data to inform us of their preferences? So when the cookie law was passed, websites now had to ask consent from users in order to store their cookie sessions, which is a good step for us because now we have control. The Guardian was one of the most customized privacy settings that I've come across when I was doing my research. And this allows the consumers to have even more control over what kind of data they're willing to share and allow companies to collect. So now we move on to Lens 3. So I want to ask today, are there any Black Mirror fans in the audience? Awesome. So I hope you've all watched the episode, Joan is Awful. I don't want to spoil anything. So in that episode, Joan, she signs up for Streamberry, which is a streaming service. But she didn't really read the terms and conditions. So it ended up that she unknowingly consented the streaming service to allow them to adapt her life story into a TV series. So what happened after that was when the episode aired, lots of Netflix subscribers, they reportedly flocked to Netflix to actually read through the terms and conditions to make sure this is not going to happen in real life. So the moral of the story is we want to make informed consent understandable. So what do I mean by that? In data privacy, we talk a lot about being transparent. We want consumers to know how we're going to store, collect, and use their data. But being transparent is not the same as being understandable. Terms and conditions privacy policies, they are very long because companies, they want to insert every legal clause in there. But who here reads them? I'm pretty sure you all don't really read them. And research has actually shown that on content in websites, people only read on an average 20% of it. So we have a document that's maybe 10 pages long. We're going to read 20% of it. That's not a lot. And what happens is that we now become liable without actually understanding what we have consented to. And this is actually a dark pattern in user experience. Actually, over 80% of consumers, we all are concerned about how our data is being used. Everyone is getting more cautious because of the rise in scams. But we're not helping them by obfuscating them with lots of legal jargon and verbose content. We actually all want to know, what's the purpose of collecting my data? What kind of data are you collecting? How are you storing it? Where are you storing it? Who are you sharing it with? We should empower consumers to make the choice on what data they want to share. So Shopify is one of the better examples I've seen in research where they try to help users understand their terms and conditions. So on the left here, you see that this is your typical legal long-form document, lots of pages to scroll. But what they did on the right here is that they provided users with a summary of the important points that you need to note in the terms and conditions. So even if you don't read the entirety of it, you can roughly understand what I'm kind of consenting to. So they try to balance between being transparent and being understandable. We move on to lens 4. So I want to talk about how to provide value for your consumers when we're talking about the exchange of data. It is not only collected data, but also derived data that companies will consume. So when we talk about data, we have self-reported data, which is what we as consumers voluntarily provide. So we are talking about maybe your email or your birth date. Then comes digital exhaust. So this is the consumer's data trail that they leave behind whenever you interact with a digital product or service. So we're talking about your browsing history or maybe your check-in location. Now, these two types of data, we as consumers, we control. We decide if we want to provide them to companies. But there's a third kind of data that we don't really have a lot of control over, and that is profiling data. So profiling data, what it is data that all these brands and companies, they derive from available personal data, which comprises of what we self-report and the digital exhaust that we put out. And what this data can be used is to profile you, to predict your preferences and your behaviors. When consumers share data, the type of data matters to them when they are exchanging for an offering. So in this consumer research study, it found out that consumers, we're actually very generous with the types of data we are willing to share when we're getting instant gratification. For example, I get a free product sample. But ironically, what they found out is that when it comes to exchanging for a personalized experience, consumers are least willing to share the most types of data. So as companies, we want to know more about the consumer, but they are willing to share less. So this forces companies to really think about, is this personalized experience that I'm providing worthwhile to really exchange for more data points? If brands and companies understand how much the data is worth to the consumers, they might be able to offer more commensurate value in return for it. So this is an HBR study of the value consumers expect in return for exchanging their data. And it's actually very important to be transparent about this exchange because that will help to build trust in them. And it really depends on the type of data and how businesses are actually going to use the data. So for example, if you're using the data to improve a product or service, consumer sentiments were in the general realm of that, hey, this enhancement is going to improve our lives. It's fair value. I'll gladly exchange the data because I'm receiving the benefit. But the value that they expect in return for their data increases when they realize that the businesses are taking their data to benefit themselves at the expense of the consumers. So when we're talking about targeted marketing or worse off, like selling data to third party, consumers want more value in exchange of what they're giving up. So Disney as a company, they've been very good at managing this value for data exchange. So if anyone has ever been to Disney World, they'll issue you these magic bands. So what it does is it will help to provide that seamless, personalized customer experience that we all want when we go to a theme park. And with this band, there's so much data on it that even the waiters in the restaurants, they know who you are by name, and they know kind of what you want and like to eat. Parents, they can even allow their own children to pay for their own snacks using their band. And we all willingly consent Disney to track where we are at all times, what we are purchasing, what we're doing, what we prefer. Last but not least, lens 5. Earn trust by practicing privacy-first design. So I'm sure lots of you are familiar with this, the privacy by design framework. So what it is in a nutshell is that we want to ensure that data privacy is considered at every stage in development. We want to make sure that the products and services that you're offering abides and complies with all the data protection regulations, and especially if you're rolling out in different countries, the regulations might be different, so that's another consideration. And you also want to enable companies to be able to meet the rising demands from consumers should they want higher levels of data privacy. So with this framework, you will be practicing good data governance by default because you're putting privacy first. And reports have shown that privacy-centric companies can leverage their commitment to privacy as a competitive advantage. And in fact, 87% of consumers report a positive impact on their brand relationships in the form of increased trust, preference over competitors, and the willingness to tell others about their company. So everybody knows who Apple is. And Apple has always championed privacy first. And they built privacy into all their products and services. And I'm sure all of you know that as of iOS 14.5, Apple has given us full control of how we want to manage our privacy settings, including the option to really opt out of letting any app trackers. And a lot of industries and companies have actually come complaining to Apple because without these data, they aren't able to track users and they aren't able to really understand what we're doing at all times. But Apple stands by its commitment to continually provide data protection to us, to the users. And that's why we trust Apple so much. Privacy and personalization can be a win-win formula. When you start off with being privacy-centric, you build the foundation of trust in your users. And when you layer personalization over it, you provide that consumer experience that keeps brands coming back to you. And when you get very loyal customers, they will be willing to advocate for your brand. And because privacy will give them more confidence in recommending a trustworthy brand. So in summary, personalization appeals to consumers and actually makes for good business. Privacy is an advantage and should never be considered as a compromise. And through the 5 lenses of responsible personalization, we can find the acceptable trade-off between privacy and personalization. Thank you.